Welcome to another episode of Dungeons and Social Distancing with Nerdarchy.
Let's discuss GM 911 Player's Backstory taking over the D&D campaign.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Dave, and as usual, I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchist Ted.
Finding your next D&D video won't be a 911 if you hit that subscribe button.
And if you attune to that notification bell, we'll keep that D&D advice, tips, and commentary coming right to you.
As we mentioned, we are doing Dungeons and Social Distancing, which simply just means we are staying away from each other. You may be used to our regular videos where we shoot in person with each other, but we are trying to follow best practices and stay away from each other until this whole pandemic thing blows over, and then we'll be back to our normally scheduled content, how you're used to seeing it. With that, we're going to jump into the video and the content, and what that usually means is we have a sponsor. Thankfully, it helps us keep the lights on. We want to thank our sponsor, Ultra Dynamic Interactive Maps. They are fantastic. Basically, they're digital map packs that you can download and use with your virtual tabletops, or even if you have like a gaming table with a TV or monitor already built into it. They have lighting effects on their maps. They have all kinds of different cool animations like weather. There's even a bridge over a ravine with a river, and the river flows. You know, the monsters can move around, animals move around. It's fantastic.
The actual layering on it is out of this world. I love just, sometimes sitting and watching the animation effects on their videos just because it's that much above the other kind of things that are out there. As Dave says, it's going to interact with your virtual tabletop, or if you happen to have the screen built into your table, it is, the best gaming mat. The grid is built into it so you can easily be able to move either your tokens or your minis or pawns around. It is just great. As Dave says, you can program in your monsters to be able to enter the battlefield at different times. I can't speak highly enough about the ultra dynamic interactive maps.
With that, let's jump into the video, and we have a GM 911. You want to read that, Ted?
Absolutely. So this is coming from Tenador, and they sent it to us from our Facebook page. One of our players keeps trying to overimpose his backstory in our campaign, not caring about the party or the ongoing story. He is adding things on the fly about it and is hindering all of us as a party. I don't know how to help him, and talking to him hasn't really worked. The GM doesn't want to just destroy his character. So what do we do?
All right, so we're going to dive into that. We have some talking points that we want to bring up, and then we'll talk about how it kind of relates to this GM 911. So first of all, let's talk about how a backstory can derail a campaign like it seems to be happening here in this GM 911.
So a backstory can take over a campaign or overshadow a campaign when a player decides that their backstory is more important than the current campaign arc, makes changes, does things, or announces that, what's going on is actually different than what is being told. If you're not making rolls to use insight and figure out a story that's there, and you just decide, oh, this character is clearly lying, and try to insert your backstory into what's here when the DM hadn't planned on it, it throws everybody for a loop, and it can throw the campaign into just this downward spiral than what the DM had planned.
Yeah, plain and simple. This is it's disruptive to the DM. It's disruptive to the other players. It's one thing to try and integrate your backstory and your character into the game, but it's a completely another to try and hijack the campaign.
So Dave, based on that, what are some ways a DM can add player agency to the game?
Well, first off, you have to have an agreement with the DM and the players at the table that this is going to be an aspect of your game. And player agency is simply the DM giving the players permission to add narrative things to the story. It's better if you start off small and build up to larger pieces if you're not familiar with doing it. And really, it should be things to enhance the narrative. This isn't a way for players to, enhance their characters. Like, we definitely have played with people that would use this to be like, oh, I found the magic sword, which has nothing really to do with the narrative. It's just the player wanting more powerful gear. So you have to respect the narrative that's going on. And when you use player agency, you should be interjecting things that are useful to the current story and plotline.
If you are a DM that allows player agency in the game, you do have to make sure you approach it from the aspect of knowing what kind of players you have. I've had, players when I've offered agency, they're like, we found a ton of money. We're now, stupid rich. And in those instances, you have to be able to say, no, that's not the direction I was really looking for. How about we try something else? And that's just a DM to player conversation that didn't actually happen in the game. They didn't find money that all of a sudden magically disappeared. That just didn't happen. So if you have conversations with your players, with your DM, and see how agency can enhance the story, can offer, challenges and fun, without just, oh, I get direct rewards because the DM offered this out to me.
Now, I will say, like, this player in this GM 911 was doing exactly that. But the caveat is you have to have permission from your GM, and, it helps if the other players buy into it as well.
So, kind of based on that, is there a way for DMs to tie your backstory into the game?
Absolutely. And for this to happen, I feel like the easiest thing to do is to have a session 0 where all your players come together, you build your characters together, you build your backstories and how you came to be an adventuring party together. And that makes it very easy for the DM to then incorporate those elements into the campaign. Or if the DM is playing, a campaign like Salt Marsh, a pre-made campaign, everyone knows. So if you're going to make a desert nomad that hates boats, hates water, and would never be near the coast, it's not going to make sense to do that. So you're going to build characters that would actually want to play in that adventure.
It sounds like they didn't have a session 0. So you could technically take, a session break, or even hey, prior to going to the next session, we're going to have a session 0 and hash all of this stuff out so that everybody can kind of get onto the same page.
What do you think, Ted? What are some ways for your backstory to be inclusive? I think we touched this a little bit with session 0, but we can dive a little deeper.
All right. So you basically, whenever you're talking about having your backstory included, I think a great way is to, talk to other players and find out where everybody connects. I played, a handful of games of Dungeon World, and they built in during the character creation how you're connected to the other characters in the party or, in the gaming group. And that really is helpful for you to do. But, you don't have to use that exact system. But if you're using a session 0, or even if you're not, you can talk to other players and find out, what is the good, the bad, how have these characters interacted in the past. That gets your story tied in. If you've got 2 characters that are going to be related, but they're vastly different, oh, well, why is that? And then when you're talking about what is the actual plot, Dave, you brought up, Ghosts of Salt Marsh. Okay, my character absolutely hates the water. Then why am I here? Well, that's a great story. And you tie that in together. You wrap a nice little bow around it. I was forced into it because of this. Years ago, we had a fantastic character that we loved the role-playing of, even if the characters didn't really get along. One of my close friends, Jim, his character was a librarian. Absolutely hated adventuring, but his mentor refused to teach him any new spells until he went out into the wide world. Dave happened to be the GM here. He basically, gave Giles the mage a boot to the rear and said, you get out there and you come back once you've done more. And it was utterly fantastic. Character hated every minute of it. Player loved the game. Character, not so much, but it gave him motivation of why that character was often adventuring, even though he didn't really want to.
So finally, Ted, how could the DM and other players, or should they even, indulge a player like the one in the GM 911?
So this is a really touchy situation. They've tried having a conversation with this player, and it hasn't really made any impact. So unfortunately, you've got to have caveats. You have to have things in place. So, ultimatums are ugly things, but you could basically tell that player, look, you have to get with the program, or you're going to have to get out. I don't like kicking players out of games, out of tables. I've had a number of players willingly leave my table for one reason or another, and it's never really fun or a great thing. Forcing them out kind of sucks. So if you've got a player who just isn't towing the rope, isn't, doing their fair share, isn't being a team player, then they are being a distraction. And if they're not willing to heed the advice of the other players and the GM, then it's time to move on. That player is just not a good fit for the table. It's just, you've got to have everybody that want to be together.
I mean, they did the thing that we always advise first. At least one of the players did. One of the players went to the person and tried to talk to them. I think in these situations, though, the DM has to be the person probably to bring it up, unless someone at the table happens to be like a really good friend or something. And even then, they should kind of coach this in a way that the DM asked me to talk to you because they know we are such good friends. And, and here's the issues. But again, maybe for this particular instance, maybe the DM has to step up and talk to them. Maybe they can negotiate about what's really important to this player from their backstory that is in the game. Or maybe they can talk about, well, you know what, after this particular arc, we can maybe get into some more of that. But like Ted said, you may have to do ultimatums where you're like, listen, if you don't knock it off, we're going to have to ask you to leave. Or, or you can even put it another way, like, hey, maybe the art group isn't really a good group for you, however you want to say it. But if one person is disrupting the fun of the rest of the group, then that one person is the one that probably should leave. Unfortunately, and it's happened over the years with us, and we hate to do it. It's very hard. Hopefully the people you're playing this game with are your friends and you want to put people before the game. But at the same time, if they're not respecting the other people at the table, they're not really leaving you a lot of other choices.
So I would, with this particular, table, with this this specific GM 911, have a conversation, revisit the concept of a session 0, and get everybody all on the same page. If that's not going to get you where you need to go, then it's time to unfortunately cut that player from the table.
We got a whole playlist dedicated to GM 911s. You can find that up here.
And you know what? You can ask GM 911s live on our weekly Patreon-only live chats.
That's not all we do. We create monthly 5e content for players and DMs alike. We hold giveaways every month that our patrons are automatically entered and more.
So until next time, stay nerdy.